The flag that couldn't wave. The flag was waving in the wind. This is probably the most repeated claim in the entire history of Apollo skepticism, and it comes from a genuine observation. In the footage, the flag does move, but the flag had a horizontal rod sewn along its top edge, placed there deliberately to keep it extended and visible in the vacuum of space, where there's no air to hold fabric out. When the astronauts drove the pole into the lunar soil, the flag moved because they were physically handling it. Once they let go, it continued oscillating, and kept going longer than it would on Earth, because there was nothing to slow it down. No air resistance means no damping. The flag settling slowly is not evidence of a studio. It's exactly what physics predicts in a vacuum.
The director who wasn't there. The landing was faked by Stanley Kubrick. The theory holds that NASA hired the director of 2001: A Space Odyssey to film a convincing fake in a controlled studio environment, leveraging his technical skill to produce something believable enough to fool the world. Kubrick's daughter Vivian has publicly and directly denied this, calling it a fabrication. Beyond that denial, the theory requires believing that over 400,000 people, engineers, scientists, technicians, and contractors spread across multiple organizations and countries, all maintained a complete secret for more than 50 years without a single credible whistleblower. The Soviet Union, which had more to gain from exposing a hoax than anyone, independently tracked the mission in real time and accepted it as genuine.
Where did the stars go? There are no stars in the photographs. The Apollo surface images show a completely black sky with no stars visible, and this absence has been interpreted as a sign that the backdrop was artificial. Photography explains this entirely. The lunar surface in daylight is intensely bright, and the cameras were set to expose correctly for sunlit subjects, which requires a fast shutter speed and small aperture. Under those settings, faint stars simply do not register on film. This is the same reason a photograph taken outdoors on Earth during the day shows no stars in the sky. The cameras were doing exactly what cameras do.
The radiation belt nobody survived, supposedly. The Van Allen radiation belts surround Earth and contain intense concentrations of charged particles, and passing through them is genuinely dangerous. NASA knew this before the mission launched. The Apollo trajectory was planned to pass through the thinner outer portions of the belts at high speed, keeping total exposure time low. The astronauts wore radiation dosimeters throughout the mission, and the measured doses they received were comparable to a few chest X-rays. Significant, but well within survivable limits. For context, astronauts aboard the International Space Station accumulate considerably more radiation over a 6-month stay and return home in good health.
The footprint that should not exist. The footprints are too perfect for dry lunar dust. The crisp, detailed boot prints visible in the surface photographs look more like impressions made in damp sand than in a dry powder, which has led some people to question whether they could be real. Lunar regolith is not like ordinary sand. It is composed of extremely fine, angular particles formed by billions of years of micrometeorite impacts grinding surface rock into jagged, irregular fragments. Those particles interlock when compressed and hold their shape precisely because of their irregular edges, unlike the smooth, rounded grains of beach sand that slide and collapse. With no wind or moisture to disturb them, those footprints remain on the lunar surface today, exactly as they were left.
The crater that was never there. The descent engine should have blasted a crater. A rocket engine landing on the moon should, by this logic, have left a visible blast crater in the surface beneath the module. During the final descent, the engine was progressively throttled down and was producing relatively low thrust by the time the module touched the ground. The surface beneath the landing site is compacted rock and dust, not loose soil. The exhaust did displace surface material. Footage of the touchdown clearly shows dust scattering outward. But a concentrated crater from a low-power engine settling onto hard ground is not what the physics requires. The absence of a crater is exactly what engineers expected.
The crosshairs that went missing? Crosshairs appear behind objects in the photographs. The Apollo cameras had a reticle, a glass plate with etched reference crosshairs positioned in front of the film, meaning those markers should always appear on top of every element in the image. In certain photographs, bright white objects appear to overlap the crosshairs, which has been used to argue the images were composited or altered. This is a well-understood photographic artifact called halation. When a very bright object is captured on film, overexposed light bleeds slightly into the surrounding area, washing out thin dark lines like crosshairs near the bright edge. It is a property of the film itself and occurs with any sufficiently bright subject. No tampering is required to produce it.
Too primitive to reach the moon. The technology of the 1960s was not advanced enough. This argument typically involves comparing the processing power of the Apollo guidance computer to modern consumer electronics, and concluding that the hardware was too primitive for the task. Processing power is not the limiting factor in reaching the moon. Orbital mechanics and engineering are. The Saturn V rocket remains one of the most powerful machines ever built. The guidance computer was not doing what a modern smartphone does. It was executing a specific, narrow set of calculations for which it had exactly the capability required. The program consumed the equivalent of roughly $280 billion in today's money, and represented a genuine decade-long engineering effort by some of the most capable technical minds ever concentrated on a single problem.
Every country looked away. Multiple countries would have exposed the hoax. For a conspiracy of this scale to have succeeded, it would have required the cooperation or silence of every space agency and independent tracking organization in the world, including those of nations with strong political motivation to humiliate the United States. The Soviet Union tracked Apollo 11 independently and in real time. They said nothing because there was nothing to expose. The Apollo missions also left laser retroreflectors on the lunar surface, physical mirrors that any observatory on Earth can bounce a laser beam off to measure the moon's distance. This has been done thousands of times by independent researchers around the world. The equipment is there. It was placed there by people who landed.
3 men with nothing to celebrate. The astronauts seemed too calm and rehearsed at the press conference. After returning from the moon, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins appeared subdued and measured at their first public appearance, which some have read as the demeanor of men concealing a secret rather than celebrating a historic achievement. Armstrong was famously private and uncomfortable with public attention throughout his life. Aldrin has spoken openly about the depression that followed the mission, describing the psychological difficulty of returning to ordinary life after doing something no human being had ever done. Collins wrote about the strange peace he felt orbiting the moon alone, completely out of contact with anyone. None of this is the behavior of performers maintaining a cover story. It's the behavior of 3 people who had been somewhere so far outside normal human experience that ordinary emotional responses no longer quite fit.